Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Baker. I'm the managing partner of the Sports Fund. Sports Fund is part of Alumni Ventures, a network-powered venture firm helping accredited individuals become more successful venture investors. Welcome to today's webinar. We're pleased you were able to join us. We're speaking today about transforming the consumer athlete world, and we'll touch a little bit on the Sports Fund and our views of the associated landscape. This presentation is for informational purposes only and is not an offer to buy or sell securities, which are only made pursuant to the formal offering documents for the fund. Please review important disclosures in the materials provided for the webinar, which you can access at www.av-funds.com/disclosures. Before we get started, a few housekeeping reminders. You will be on mute the entire presentation, and the webinar is recorded and will be shared after the event. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to answer all questions submitted or follow up with you via email. To ask questions, please enter your questions into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel and click submit. There were some questions that were submitted ahead of time. We will try to answer all of those that we can, but there were some that were not related to this or the Sports Fund. They were more general to Alumni Ventures. We'll follow up with an email on those. Some more legal stuff that thankfully flashed through quickly. And again, quick introduction, and then we'll overview the Sports Fund, and then we'll get to the meat of the presentation or the conversation. So first off, what is Alumni Ventures? We're America's largest venture capital firm for individuals. Our goal is to democratize and make venture more accessible to investors. We have been doing this for a while, 9-ish years. We have investments from over 10,000 individuals. We have a community that's opted in to work with us and our portfolio companies of over 650,000 people. We have over 1,300 portfolio companies, and there's over $1.3 billion has been invested through us. On to the next slide. Next slide, please. So the Sports Fund, which is launching right around now, Keaton, myself, and a third person that's not on the call, Matt Jones, will be running the fund. We're going to be investing in companies related, venture capital-backed companies related to the sports industry, kind of looking at the pillars of fan engagement, media, esports and gaming, emerging leagues and teams, and more relevant to this discussion, sports performance. The fund will have about 15 to 20 investments. It'll take us about the next 12 to 18 months to put it together. It's going to be diverse across the themes I just mentioned. It's a $10,000 minimum to invest, and you also get access to the Alumni Ventures syndication program that is very popular with other investors. Today, I have myself, managing partner. I've been with the firm since 2017, mechanical engineering degree from the University of Wisconsin and an MBA from Duke University. I own a very small part of 2 baseball franchises and a golf league. This is kind of my involvement in sports. I played a little bit back in the day, but my sports career is over. Keaton is part of the team. You want to introduce yourself, Keaton?
Yeah, briefly. I come from a sports background. I went to University of Wisconsin and got my undergrad degree in kinesiology, thinking I wanted to be a teacher and coach like a lot of former athletes. I also played basketball there. Had a brief professional career overseas in Europe for 5 years, and like many athletes, that came to an end quicker than I had wished. Kind of fell in love with venture investing after meeting Greg back in 2007 when he was first getting everything up and running with his funds at Alumni Ventures, and I've been around the company since then. Formally joined again in 2020 and have been really excited to get the Sports Fund off the ground, kind of combining history for myself, and then kind of my emerging love for venture capital investing. And of course, I'll segue here. I know these guys will both be way too humble, but we have some really great guests today, both with pedigrees in kind of this space in sports performance that I'm sure they won't list, but just know these are guys who've been around the block, seen everything, and now both working in the tech and investing space. I'll let them both introduce themselves, and you'll see throughout the conversation how bright they are. But I'm really excited to have Josh and KK join us. Josh, you can give a quick overview of yourself, and then I'll have KK go.
Sure. Thanks, Keaton. So like Keaton and Greg, I'm also a Wisconsin alum. Unlike Keaton, I was not that good of a basketball player, so I did not play basketball other than intramurals, but it's where I got my start in my career. I was a student assistant strength coach for the men's basketball team my last year of undergrad, and that kind of launched my career to where my first job out of college was with the Chicago Bulls as an assistant strength coach. Spent 4 years there. During that time, that's how KK and I got to know each other really well. So I won't say how long ago that was because that'd be dating us, KK, but got recruited away from the Bulls to take over the men's basketball program at Purdue. So spent 7 years there building that program. And it was about 6 years ago, I was kind of trying to decide what was next for me. Long story I won't get into. Thought I was going to go the GM route, and got an email out of nowhere from a company called Future, one of my now co-founders, to go and make the leap, move out to San Francisco and build this company that at the time was 8 people in a basement. And the only thing I knew about it was in 10 months, we're probably out of money and there's probably not a company that exists anymore. Fast forward 5 years later, I hired several hundred coaches for that company. We scaled seed to Series C, and along the way, similar to Keaton, I kind of grew to love the venture side of things, built a relationship with one of our earliest investors, TXV Partners, and was fortunate to join them full time last April. So now wearing the VC hat, investing into the best early stage human performance companies on one side, and on the other side, investing directly into sports teams, minority ownership stakes, and things like that.
Well, Josh, you still don't really age, so I think you can look at my gray hair and that's to pick up on some stuff.
That's all dye for you. That's dye.
Yeah,
but yeah, KK Lyles here, and really fortunate to be part of this group. Excited for the time today. So thank you. But my background, I have my doctorate in physical therapy, and when I was in grad school out east, I worked as a strength and conditioning coach at Northeastern University. And quickly for me is combining those two worlds, and especially in athletics. But I would say at the time I was only focused on athletics, where it's like you're kind of either injured and rehabbing, or you're healthy and you're optimizing. And so those two worlds for me were just a continuum. And the reality is athletes, but humans, we're just somewhere on that continuum always. And most of the time, I think all of us, it's like there's stuff that we can work on to improve on ourselves, both from a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint as well. And I had fortunate opportunity, timing, luck, all those things kind of came together. Interned with the Celtics throughout grad school, and then as soon as I graduated, I got the head job as a strength coach with the Timberwolves, spent a few seasons there, then went to the Golden State Warriors, obviously had some success there and really watched the success there, and then moved on to the Atlanta Hawks, where I kind of oversaw our entire sports medicine, sports performance, sports science staff, and really started thinking about more holistically. I've always thought that way. Is how do we really understand our athletes, and then with that information, what do we do with it to really help them? And so that's just always been my passion. I've always been really interested in technology and how we can use that technology. And so leaving the Hawks in 2018, working with Navy Special Warfare, again, seeing on the inside, like just even more technology of what's out there, what people are working on. And so I've kind of found myself in this space of pursuing what's being built, and then that's kind of led to these relationships with different investor groups and different groups, and the network kind of grows where there's a lot of similarities, and even, you know, teams and organizations, leagues now are really interested in what is out there. How do we use this technology to better our product or our athlete or our person? And now for me, it's always been like leaving pro sports has been more of a focus on like, well, how do we bring this high level stuff out to the masses? Because with technology, the whole idea behind it is like you can scale technology a lot easier. And so pro sports, you know, you like to think as the cream of the crop as far as the access and the level of care and just what most of the athletes have available to them. Most of us in regular life don't. But now through some of these technologies, we're starting to see that come downstream. So it's really, it's super fun. It's where I spend all my time now kind of pursuing. So it's great. Yeah.
Love it. And both these guys kind of alluded to it. And Jaquan, the next slide, we'll maybe touch briefly on Future, because I think it's a great case of exactly what we're talking about. Josh, and if you want to share any details about it, I'll tee it up quickly. Future is an Alumni Ventures portfolio company. Before the existence of Sports Fund, this is actually a different part of our portfolio, but this was the company that Josh worked with, bringing that team together. And maybe, Josh, you can just tee up kind of what the core of that was about and kind of how it fits into what we're talking about today, this thesis around bringing exceptional resources to the masses.
Yeah, so I'll go back to just kind of the quick origin story and the problem that we're working to solve at Future is, you know, you look at the current crisis of healthcare, especially in our country, but even globally, and what you see is people are living shorter lives, lower quality lives, and, you know, effectively 80% of our population would be deemed more or less unhealthy. You know, in fact, 3 out of 4 people are obese or overweight, and 4 out of 5 people are not active enough, if at all. And so all of this kind of snowballs into the, you know, mass chronic type conditions that you see in disease, whether it's obesity, diabetes, you know, heart disease, all these sorts of things. And when you really look at it, almost all of that is entirely preventable. But the problem is the way sort of this version of healthcare 2.0 is structured is such that, you know, it's all reactionary. It's all really sick care is what it is. And it's, you know, the point at which you get sick, now you qualify for all this care and coverage and, you know, treatment, whatever that might be. But when you look at the problem, in reality, many times it's kind of too late at that stage. But even if you intervene there, you're just, you know, extending a sickness. And what needs to happen is something on the front end. And so with Future, what we looked at was who is the small subset of the population that has already solved this problem of, you know, managing their day-to-day health overwhelmingly successfully. And when you look there, you look at elite athletes and, you know, everyone KK was just describing, Navy, you know, special warfare, all those sort of stuff. And you look at billionaires, people with unlimited means. And what's true of both groups is any one of those people who gives a shit at all about managing their day-to-day health is overwhelmingly successful. And the solution that they have is exactly the same. It's they have not just a coach, but they have a constellation of experts that manage it for them, because what it comes down to, our longevity and our health span and ultimately our performance, is really 5 critical elements. It's how we move, how we eat, how we sleep, how we manage our stress, and really our community and kind of our social ties being the 5th one. And if you look at, and KK did a phenomenal job of kind of describing it, but if you look at what myself and KK were doing on the athlete side, we sort of sat at the center of that. Yes, you know, lifting weights, conditioning, these sorts of things were sort of the vehicle through which we were working with our athletes. But, and KK can chime in here as well, is we are the ones that are eating every single meal with them. So even though we're not the dietitian, we have to know enough to help them make better lifestyle decisions there. We're the one that's with them 7 days a week. So we're talking to them about how they sleep. We're talking to them about meditation, mindfulness, journaling, all these sorts of things. And with Future, that was, you know, the thesis is, what if through technology, we pair you with someone like myself, someone like KK, that typically only someone like Keaton at Wisconsin or a pro athlete would have access to. And now put that person in your life with you every single day, 7 days a week. They are giving you custom workouts based on what you need, but they're also just getting to know you, talking about your life, and helping you manage these other areas for you.
Yeah, I think the thing that's fascinating, and Jaquan, we can go to the next slide to kind of get going on the conversation, but this is like a great springboard, because what's fascinating that Josh laid out is like, this is an access to resources question. And technology is the enabling thing that has lowered the barrier to accessing these resources. And so, this is two guys, and if you can't tell, like, the performance coaches are usually like the heart and soul of a team. They're kind of like the driving force, the spiritual center of a team. The guys that are in these roles, men and women who are in these roles, are like really passionate about this stuff, and there's only so many of them in the world. And how do we access that? There's a lot of new tools coming out for the everyday athlete and people who still love to move or want to increase their health, increase their performance, to start accessing these things. And now more than ever, I mean, there's just tools available. Maybe one of the first questions I want to ask you guys, as you were coaching at the elite levels, you had access to things that normal people didn't. And I think, people in your shoes were looking for the cutting edge advantage to help their players. What's something that you were using, let's say 10 years ago in that role, that you're now seeing trickle into mainstream health and scalable solutions that you think is a real benefit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things off the top of my mind. So my first job I mentioned with Minnesota Timberwolves, at the time, I think we were the first team in the NBA to use the in-arena cameras to track, and we paid extra to get like the performance metrics. So all the NBA teams got like, dribbling and shooting and percentage, all that. When I was like, whoa, we can get like speed and distance and acceleration. I'm like, yeah, we're paying for that. Like, what are we going to do with it? I'm like, I don't know, but we've never looked at this. And so I think like for us, that was like the first time, like, hey, what does the workload and intensity actually mean? But now, with Whoops and Auras and Apple Watches, like that same idea, it's the same exact concept, has now reached all of us, right? Where it's like, how much have I actually done today? How many steps have I taken? Like the conversation of like, how many steps have you taken? Like that has all changed in the last decade too. I think even from at the highest level of sport, like we're still figuring out, well, how do you use that information to then optimize? And so of course, like we haven't figured it out at elite sport yet to a T. I don't know if we ever will, but we certainly haven't figured it out. Like, how does the consumer react to that, or what do they do with that information? And that's the piece. Like, if I could sum up the last decade, it's been like we've gotten really good with technology to track things, and that's where we were in pro sport. Like, we can almost track anything we want on an athlete. Same thing as a consumer now. We can almost track anything we want to, but it's what do we do with that information? Like, that's the next frontier. And that I think we're coming up on.
Yeah, I think, and I would echo that. I think, kind of around that same time as KK was with the Timberwolves, was, I think around the time I was transitioning from the Bulls and into Purdue. And I think that was the first time you really started to see a lot of these technologies come into elite sport. It sort of had existed in Europe and Australia, but not really in North America. We're kind of behind. North America historically has always kind of been very data poor, experience rich, as opposed to Europe, Australia have always been the opposite, very data rich, experience poor. And what I mean by that, and Keaton, you could probably resonate with this, is in North America, traditionally, coaching was all intuition and feel, whether that was your actual sport coach and practices and what was the intensity and volume and all of that of practice, as well as if it was your strength coach. It was sort of a feel thing, but you never stopped to consider that 2 or 3 hour practice, for instance, that didn't just have the same effect across all 15 basketball players. Even though they might have done the exact same workout, it required different levels of output for each of them individually. And so what KK is talking about with all the cameras was, something similarly we started using GPS, I think my second year at Purdue, and KK, I think you guys might have been, and maybe 2 NBA teams. We're the only college team at the time. And, candidly, and KK, you probably echo this, I didn't even know necessarily what to make of it, but now it was giving us outputs. And what that allowed us to start to do is, one, realize and show to coaches and show to players that the stress that this is having, the effects that this is having is different for each one of you. And now we can start to think about how do we manipulate the inputs that go into that? And when we manipulate those inputs, how does that then in turn affect the outputs? And so what I think you're seeing in the consumer market now is finally you have those technologies where, I think KK and I both are wearing our Apple Watch. I have my Oura Ring. And so I get all this data that athletes used to have, but I think on the consumer side, it's still in that first phase of it where I have all this data. This is all great. Now what do I do with it? And I think that's probably what we'll get into here. I think that's the evolution of where things are going.
Yeah, so you're kind of beating me to the next question, and data is a key enabler, and the decision making out of that is now like a new bottleneck. And when I think about having elite coaching, one of the benefits of that is access to knowledge, right? Even as a college player, I might have the information, but I don't know what to do with it. I'm a 20-year-old or whatever. Something like Future, the decision was put a human coach in the loop, scale their presence by using technology. But we're also starting to see a lot of things like AI and mathematical decision making, even if it's an 80-20 rule, and it's not the same experience as an elite coach. The computer can get a lot of that decision making or points you directionally to the right space. Like, how are new things like that opening up access to knowledge that is kind of the current bottleneck?
Yeah, I think it's important Josh, you kind of nailed it in what you're saying. Like, it's important to recognize that what we've learned from GPS, right, the camera system, heart rate monitors, you name it, right, Oura Rings, all the smart stuff that we have, is that we're all very individualized. And like what Josh was saying, what a team of 15 go through, each player had a different experience of that exact same practice, right? And so I think now we're starting to accept, like, I can't just give this blanket approach to whoever I'm working with, the people, whether it's a team or a group, it doesn't matter, right? Where it's like, and I think consumers are now starting to recognize, like, I need something that's for me, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what started is like, hey, just my preference, is now people are recognizing, no, like the way I sleep and the way I eat, right, the way I train, when I train, all these things start to factor in. And so it's becoming so much more individualized, which is great, because that's how you become more efficient, you get better results. I think for me, I've always struggled, and actually, Josh, we kind of talked about this the other day, where I've enjoyed being on like the rehab side of things, because when you're hurt, progress is easy to see because you feel better. When you feel good and you're like, hey, I'm starting to do all these things, like, how do you feel? You're like, yeah, I still feel good. I'm like, okay, but now how do you feel? Like, yeah, I'm good. Like, okay, but now we're tracking your sleep. How do you feel? Like, yeah, I'm good. And so sometimes it's harder for people to see that progress when things are going really well. And I say all that because I think, as technology, the AI stuff, like, I've seen some really cool stuff. And like what you're seeing is some of these groups are essentially creating algorithms of like the greatest minds in our fields. And now how do you blend that into a system, right, that trains and adapts accordingly to the individual? And so, and it's happening like this, right? So even I work with athletes, like it takes me time. Like I need to sit down, process, block out distractions, and like really think through who I'm working with. And where we're going to be is we're going to get people who are smarter than me and a collection of those minds all in some algorithm that's making decisions like that. And again, I think that's just going to unlock the potential of where people start feeling like, man, not only do I feel good, but like this is a different type of good. Like I'm not sore all the time, or I feel energized all the time. Like, I think a lot of the consumer space is like energy levels. You just look at like people are desperate, right? Again, they don't have the right habits in place to allow them to feel the energy they should. And so there's going to be some low-hanging fruit to see the results in the consumer space. Athlete space is obviously harder, but I think what you're starting to see as far as in elite athletes is career longevity is changing, right? And now, like we've talked in some circles, it's like this thought of like performance longevity. It's not even that you're playing longer, but like this window of time. And in basketball, we called it like their prime, you know, right? Like their prime used to be kind of like 24 to like 28 was like this prime of a player's career, where now you're starting to see like 24 to like 32 is the prime. And that's only going to keep changing. So I think, you know, where a lot of this is going to start trending to is like this cohesion and collection of methodologies, knowledge, experiences that create a customized, individualized approach. So you're getting the inputs, you're getting it synthesized, and then you're getting spit out a program, or how do I, or how does the individual respond to it?
I'll jump in quick in the middle here, Josh, because KK said something interesting, but like I think about prime and translating that to a consumer. And if the athlete's prime is now 24 to 32, what can the consumer prime be? Everybody says, man, I used to feel great as a teenager. What if you felt great from 18 to 75? And how does the arc, and to your point, KK, about individualization, how does the arc change over time? My needs as a 20-year-old are far different than my needs as a 50-year-old. And can, you know, customization and putting a knowledge base into an algorithm, can it meet my needs at different points in my life? And the hope is, yeah, that it can. I mean, Josh, we've shared about Steve Nash, who is a former, you know, basketball superstar. He's very interested in longevity and kind of using the tools of just like general health guidance to extend like the average person's prime, physical prime, mental prime. And I think it's a really fascinating topic because it takes, all coaching isn't just about a feedback loop. And so it's observation, feedback, adaptation, and the ability to do that with new tools, your wearables, computer vision, and then algorithms that can kind of just do some of that thinking for you is really fascinating. John, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the previous.
You know what's interesting is you're talking about that of just for consumers, like, man, I want to feel like I did when I was 18 to 22, and that was my prime. The reality, and KK, you and I were just talking about this yesterday, Keaton, I think you can resonate with this. Even think about like college athletes, and they're in their prime during that period. You're living like shit by and large. Like, you're not sleeping, you're up playing video games, you're out partying. Like, I mean, you're in college, all these athletes, they're out all night drinking, and yet like that's their prime, that's when they feel the best. And so when you think about how it extends into you know, consumers and, you know, how sort of we feel, KK, you touch on that, the like tying how you feel to it. Most people's normal, where they go, oh, I feel good, I feel normal, is actually they feel like shit, but they don't know any different because they've been able to get by because when you're young, you can. So then they've been able to rationalize and convince themselves that, you know what, as long as I get 6 hours of sleep, I'm good. And the reason why you feel that way is because your body renorms against the last 24 hours. So you just compare how I feel today versus how I feel yesterday. And there's not going to be a big difference between those two things. But in that example, there's research around this. If you go 2 weeks straight, 6 hours of sleep every single night, you'll still feel normal. But compared to where you were 2 weeks ago, functionally, you're at the equivalent of being, I think, like 24 to 48 hours without sleep. Like, you are a functioning alcoholic at that point in terms of your ability to recall information, your reaction time, all these sorts of things. And so I think what a lot of this data is starting to allow us to do is start to point to, you know, what is or what can be optimal for us, and start to make those connections, start to, you know, hey, and it's funny, KK, you probably did similar with my college athletes. One of the things that I did, even just beyond monitoring them, if we identified maybe sleep was a need, say, hey, over these next 3 days, you know, typically it was over a weekend, I want you to get a total of 30 hours of sleep. Like, however you get, hopefully primarily at night, but get 30 hours. Tell me how you feel right now, track each day, and like on Monday, come back to me and tell me how you feel. And it was wild because it was like, I had just given them some magic potion. They would come back, they're like, Josh, this is like, man, I've never felt so good. I have so much energy, but it's the first time they've felt that, or it's the first time, you know, Derrick Rose with us as a rookie at the Bulls, he literally ate nothing but candy. Our progression from his first year to his third year was like nothing but candy, to then like McDonald's and Burger King, and then eventually like salads from those places. And then by his third year, his MVP year, he actually hired a chef. He saw the benefits of nutrition, but it took both getting him there and drawing that connection with how that made him feel. And so I think that's what the data is doing for us. And just to kind of wrap on the point of where we're at, because Keaton, you mentioned the human in the loop, but the AI. So I think where we're at is, and AI is all great, and the intelligent is phenomenal, and a lot of really good things are going to come out of that. But something KK and I experienced in the earliest days when teams over here started hiring sports scientists is you had all these brilliant sports scientists, and I'm not taking anything away from them, but they were locked up on a computer. They knew none of the athletes, and they would come back with all this data saying, hey, this guy needs to rest, or this guy needs to do that, or he's good to go. Meanwhile, KK and I are with the athlete every day, and we're like, well, did you know, like, he just broke up with his girlfriend, he's this, he's that, he's that. So no, he's not good to go. And so I think that that is the critical element of having that human in the loop, to be able to make sense of the data, because the data is meant not to make the decision, but to inform you where to look, what questions to ask that you might not otherwise ask. And so the best athletes have had coaches. I think for the rest of us, short of say something like Future, we may not have a coach, but we can start to be the coach for ourselves if these platforms like Oura Ring, which I think they are, they're doing a good job of starting to educate. When you see this number, when you feel like this, consider this input. And that's what the best coaches do too. Like KK and I both did it with our players, is we educated them to start to make some of their own choices based on how they feel, because no amount of data can tell me or KK how one of our athletes, how like you, Keaton, as an athlete feel. Only you know how you feel.
Yeah, I think it's like an interesting point around like theory versus application. And again, translating it to the consumer, I think a more rudimentary version of using data, you know, my Whoop band tells me I didn't sleep. I right now, instead of being an athlete who just broke up with my girlfriend, I'm a dad with a 4-month-old baby. How do you include that decision in the practicalities of life with like all the data that's floating around? If my Whoop just says sleep a little longer, and in practice I go, well, yeah, I wish, but my baby needs a bottle, right? And so it's an interesting thing. Is again, hopefully these systems become more sophisticated. I think, you know, ultimately nothing replaces a knowledgeable human, but like, you know, we can also do some directional guidance that's really helpful. Another thing you guys both alluded to, I think is fascinating, because as much as we talk about performance and like our physical body, so much of this is about habit building, about psychology. And one of the things I'm curious about in terms of like a consumer athlete, I think wearables do a really good job of this. I think improving interactions with data do a really good job of this. You talk about like education, but what's enabled for, you know, the person who's maybe a new mover as well as the retired NBA superstar? You need motivation, you know, it's just a different mindset. How do things like this start to enable psychology habits and things like that? It's not strictly a physical game. This is also like a mental thing, and using nudging. You know, my Whoop reminds me to check in every morning. My dashboard reminds me that I should get more sleep, whatever it is. Like, how are you seeing those things play in here?
Yeah, it's I actually you bring up a really good point, and I think that's where like some of the wearables fall short right now. Like, if I have 4 kids, one under the age of 2. If you looked at my Oura every day, my Oura is like, oh, time to take it easy, better rest. You know, I'm like, well, like if I literally followed that, right, like I wouldn't do anything because it's saying I can't, or not that I can't or I shouldn't, right? And it's like, well, if I spend 365 days recovering, guess what I'm not doing? I'm not training, I'm not doing anything that'll actually help me get healthier, right? And so I think that's where we're at, is like everyone's got to find, like, it comes down to like find your why. Like, why is it, or what is it that you're trying to achieve? Like, what are you striving for? What's your goal? And then what's that roadmap look like to get there? And how does the data support you? And I personally, like, I said it from the beginning, like, I absolutely love technology. I love all this data, right? But I'm never going to let the one piece of data dictate everything, right? Like, I've always say, all the athletes, anyone who I ever talk to, it's like, listen, what makes up our lives, it's probably like a 10,000 piece puzzle, right? And I don't think any one piece is really that more important or less important than the other. There might be times where one becomes more important or you need to focus in on one, but at the end of the day, if you're missing one piece, you have an incomplete puzzle, right? And I like that analogy because it's like, okay, all this data helps guide us, and that's the big thing, right? It's got to guide us, but we have to know what it's guiding us to and what is our role, like, and to the point, like, consumers have to be educated. And I think, probably all of us on the call and probably most of the people listening right now, like, we live in this world, we're interested in it, and we kind of take for granted, like, we assume this is like what everyone thinks about. Like, I'm often reminded, like, I'm like, yeah, like, everyone knows what HRV is, right? And it's like, you talk to the neighbor and like, what? and the reality is like, the larger population, like, they don't have any clue, right? And they're not even interested in sleep, and they don't care about their nutrition. That's why there's obesity as a problem, because it's like, it's not even in their mind that they're doing it wrong. I had an NBA player who said where he grew up in the South, like, they drank soda, like, instead of breast milk. Like, that was just normal, right? So it's like, reset your expectations into like, wait a second, what are we trying to achieve? And like, there's no amount of data, right, that's going to be like, oh, I'm going to get this mother to feed breast milk, not soda, to their kids, where it's like, or a Whoop, they're not telling you that, right? But all that to say, because I do think it's like, people have to figure out, okay, and everyone, like, we have to do a better job of educating and thinking more holistically in nature, as far as how do we pull all this information and how does it then guide us, right? It can't be so precise. Maybe we'll get there with some of this AI stuff where it's like, no, today you need to eat X, Y, and Z, exercise for this long, this type of exercise, right, at this heart rate. Like, we might get there, right? It's what coaches do now intuitively. Like, to me, that's more of the art of this, where it's like, you have a relationship with the person in front of you, and based off that relationship, based off all the input you have, whether it's data or just subjective feedback, right, you blend science and art to say, this is what I want you to do today, right? And then you create that feedback loop that you were talking about earlier, Keaton. And so I think ultimately it comes down to, like, okay, how do we set goals? And how do we create a roadmap to get those goals? And what's the technology? What are the pieces? What's the support system to build that roadmap? And it's not easy, right? But that's where we need to get to, is what I think.
Awesome.
I think to echo on that, and what KK is getting at there is, it doesn't matter if it's that single mom somewhere rural or it's, Steph Curry. What you're doing is, human beings are human beings. And so what you're doing is you're meeting them where they're at. And so all of that starts as a coach. It starts with the relationship and getting to know them. One of the things that we always talked about at Future was turning over rocks to collect and connect dots. So turning over rocks is just learning about that other person. Who are they? What's important to them? Who's important to them? As it relates to training and stress, what do they have going on? What has made them successful? How have they failed? And then that's informing and sort of earning your right to have influence over habit change, because all this stuff is habits. People don't, not eat healthy or not work out because they don't want to. In fact, you look at it, people try to start something new every single year. It's just they don't stick with it, because most of the stuff misses, meeting them where they're at. And, I think, so that's one, is starting there. And I think, KK, you were kind of talking about stress. And I think that's the other part of meeting them where they're at, is everything is a product of stress, and your body doesn't know the difference between if this stress is physical or if this stress is psychological, emotional. All it knows is stress. And the thing about stress, I think throughout our society, we just see stress. Stress is bad. And that's happening more and more. Like hard things are bad. We just seek comfort, no stress. You see it in professional sports, in the NBA. KK, check me if I'm off base here. But like you see load management in the NBA. And that's become the solution. It's like, oh, these guys are under so much stress. We're just going to take the next 3 games off. And like that's where data starts to become a bad thing, because in the case of an NBA athlete, there's a certain level of stress that they have to be, you know, not just resilient, but they have to be sort of anti-fragile to go out and perform. It's part of what you're asking them to do. And so oftentimes, to KK's point of like even earlier, you're like, man, my Whoop or my Aura would just say I'm down every single day. There's an understanding that you have to have of where you're operating, but you still have to perform. And you can manipulate the types of stress and, you know, intensities and the way that you apply stress. I think the biggest issue is just if you apply the same stress over and over and over, where it's a monotonous, you know, single source stress, that's where you see breakdowns and things like that. But to both your guys' point, life happens. I mean, and I'll end on this point, but like my college athletes, for instance, we have a big game. We just beat Michigan State at home. They're the number 5 team in the country, but we have another big game in 2 days. So all the coaches are saying, hey guys, don't go out tonight. Keaton, what's happening? That campus is going crazy. You are going out. So instead of me going around saying, hey guys, don't go out, I'm going around saying, hey guys, make sure you have your last drink, like whatever you're gonna drink early, and make sure you have your last drink 3 hours before your head hits the pillow, because that gives us a better chance of getting like some reasonable sleep.
Yeah, contextual. And yeah, so Greg, do we have time for one more question?
I think we've got several questions submitted by the audience, so we should probably jump into those. And I'm gonna start with ones that are more related to Josh and KK, so that and then the fun ones towards the end. But first one from Paul: what are the top sports management systems commonly used for performance tracking and training? Where do you see sports-related technology going in the next 5 to 10 years? Are there trends any different for sports fan versus general consumer technology?
KK, I'll let you take that one. I think you've experimented with the most of them.
Yeah, I think the biggest ones you see in sports right now are systems like, I mean, Catapult has been one of the leaders, a GPS unit, and Connexon is really popular in indoor settings, and especially the NBA. And I think what you're going to see is, I think you might see this transformation into media first. And I think you've seen some stuff already where it's like LeBron's chase down block from behind or something, or like how fast the guy ran on that, or LeBron runs on that, or how high did the guy jump. Like, so you'll start to see some of these metrics kind of infused into like production, media production. There's some arenas now that will actually, like on one of the scoreboards in the corner of the arena, will put some of these more performance metric stats, how far guys run in a game, something like that. And again, like I think they're just showing it because they can, right? Like there's no, I don't know exactly where that's going to go yet, but I think long term, what it means for the consumer at least is, I think it's going to be eventually getting towards like youth athletes, to be honest. And it's like, okay, how do I prepare, or like what are the markers that like the elite are doing? And I think as a whole, like especially performance, the profession, like long-term development of an athlete, like I don't think we do a very good job of that in North America, part for lots of reasons why. But this is one way that we can start to address, like, okay, when a kid is 8, if his goal is to play professional X, how do we actually build them, right? Like, what's the healthiest way to get there? So just having that information, I think, will help create that path we were talking about earlier.
In material science, the U.S. military is often an early adopter. Who are the early adopters in human performance? How do you think about ideating, developing solutions, and putting those solutions into production?
Yeah, it's a loaded question.
Well,
I'll go quick. And
I think
Josh,
you guys lived as the early adopters, didn't you? Isn't that been your life?
yeah, I think, well, and I think you see a new swell of early adopters, and this is like the biohacking community, and this group, and people who are really looking for that cutting edge, or who are willing to try to be at the forefront of technology and innovation, to be healthier. And so that's where I think like the early adopters are going to be, because even in pro sport, like, I always wanted to be early adopter, but like there's a fine line. Like you don't want to be too early and you start recommending something that doesn't work, right? Or it's not proven, or it could be hurtful or harmful. And so yeah, there's a balance, but like general consumers, I definitely would lead into that group of people who are like, hey, I'm seeking how to be better, right? And what can help.
And I would say if you look at the other side of that equation, like who are really pushing the boundaries, and KK, you can speak to this from, inside experience, but you look at the elite military, especially in the US, and I think even going back probably 7-8 years ago now when I was at Purdue, as I was looking to how could I put us on the cutting edge with our athletes at Purdue, because we were already using GPS and force plates and all this other stuff. You had to start to look outside of sport. And when you looked at elite military, what you realize is it's only been maybe 10 or 15 years now since the government has started to identify that elite military are the top 1% of the top 1% of human beings on this planet. And we can't do what we used to do, which was like run them through all these crazy boot camps and just spit them out, because we can't replace them. And so they poured all these government resources into developing the technologies, such that you are optimizing human beings to the point where, like with an elite sniper, they literally train to be able to, in any environment, drop their resting heart rate so low, like in the teens or low 20s. And the reason for that is because they need to be able to pull the trigger in between heartbeats. And so that's what you're dealing with there. Or the other example would be Red Bull in particular, extreme sport athletes, where like if they get out of flow for even a split second, they don't fail, they die. And so what are they doing there? That's where you're sort of pushing the boundaries. And then I think a lot of that starts to like trickle into elite sport. I mean, the Oura Ring, the technology was developed originally in elite military.
Yeah, the one other thing too is like who's developing this stuff. I think you're seeing like research groups that are well funded, that are non-profit, because I think, anytime business, like they're going to be driven by profit. So at some point, whether the product's ready or not, you got to sell, right? Or you don't survive as a company. But there's some of these research centers that, usually attached to universities that are well funded with grants and things like that. I mean, I've heard some pretty wild projects, and it's like, they are pushing the bounds of what's even possible, right? Now, and eventually that will start to get trickled out, turn it into a product or into a business. But those are kind of the leaders, I think, as far as innovation.
All right, please tell me that cold plunges were crazy and you shouldn't do them. I'd rather stop.
There's something to be said. What stands the test of time too. I'm a firm believer. Like there's things that like stick around for hundreds of years. Well, I don't know. There might be something there.
Well, and it's interesting. A lot of this stuff is like kind of a combat to sort of our modern society, and a lot of these technologies almost are like combating technologies that have created the problems in the first place, because like as human beings, we're meant to change temperatures. Like instead, we're just comfortable. We turn on the air conditioning, we turn on the heat, we layer up. And so in doing that, you're never giving your lymphatic system, a workout, which again, it's stress. You need to stress all these types of systems, but it's almost getting back to like our sort of evolutionary biology with a lot of this stuff where you have to like artificially create it, as opposed to like when humans first were on Earth, like when it was cold, you were cold, and when you bathed, you jumped into a freezing cold river, and so you had this natural change of temperatures which doesn't exist anymore.
All right, what partnerships with tracking technologies do you predict we'll see more of in the future? Example, do you see Whoop partnering with performance apparel or brand or nutrition/meal companies more?
Go ahead,
Okay,
Josh.
you want to take that?
No, well, I'll give my thoughts, but I think you might have a better sense. I mean, I think you play in that space a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see more and more of it. Ultimately, it's all these companies. It's an arms race for data, right? So it only makes sense for a Whoop, for an Aura, to find as many different ways that they can both get more data as well as take the data that they have to inform purchasing decisions. And by the way, these are things where it's like, it's directing you to things that you actually like or actually are going to be helpful. It's not like spamming you with like crazy, purchasing decisions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see more and more of that. And I think it's necessary too to start to have that integration and interplay of data from all of the various things, because again, historically, all of this stuff has been siloed. Your sleep data, your fitness data, your whatever different biomechanical data, force data, and none of this stuff functions in a silo. It needs to be integrated. And I think that's also where there's opportunity for more new technologies to emerge that actually not just do that, but do that really well.
All right. Counter to a point Josh made earlier, when do you see that load as a risk for injury? Short-term gains might be okay for a while, but when does it become a red flag for a major injury, potentially during the playoffs, or possibly in a game at Golden State with an MVP candidate?
Yeah, well, and KK, you'll chime in here as well, but one of the things that you're looking at is first, what point in the year are you? So if we are in the off season, as an example, and this is the issue actually with, and I won't belabor it, but this is the issue that you see oftentimes in professional sport, is in the off season, a lot of times you're not stressing to the degree that you need to prepare your body to endure the rigors of competition in season, which is then leading to some of this, magnification of like load management. So if we're in the off season, and this was true when I was with the Bulls and at Purdue, I actually don't care if you're sore. I don't care if you start to feel broken down or things like that, because we're 6 months away from playing a game. We're 5 months away from playing a game. And there's going to be a natural ebb and flow of when we're pushing your limits to raise your capacities, where, yeah, there might be a few days where we really have to pull back because actually physically you're starting to break down. But we're going to see the fruit of that in season. Now, in season, to that point of the question, is where, yes, now I'm very, very targeted and surgical. And what you start to look at there is what is the acute load versus the chronic load. And you're sort of looking at the interplay there. And if something is getting really out of whack, then yes, maybe the solution is to sit a player, for instance. The problem, and I guess what I was alluding to, is a lot of this data has led to just a cop-out. Instead of training to endure the stress, the solution is just automatically, let's take more time off. And then what that leads to is I'm lowering the player's capacity to endure stress. So in fact, when I put them back out on the court, they're even further underprepared. And that's where a lot of these injuries are coming from. But KK, chime in there if I'm off base on any of that.
No, the only thing I'll add, and I mean, we can spend a whole weekend seminar about workload management, but
yes.
yeah, I think it's important, like, especially from the outside, right, is like, we don't know the details of the player, and that's what it becomes really hard managing from a team side and a player side. Like, assuming the reference is to Embiid, last night. And so,
No, I didn't have any specific reference. Mine was general.
But like, the reality is like, we don't know the pain Embiid's dealing with. We don't know what his range of motion has changed, his local muscular endurance. Is he fatigued? We don't know how well he's been sleeping or not, right? And so, oftentimes everything gets, from the public's perspective, it's like, oh, they're resting him. Well, why? And are they trying to be pro? And the reality is, we don't know, right? Like, there's a lot that goes into those decisions. And for all we know, Embiid could be dealing with something for the last, 2 months, right? But now it's just crept above this pain threshold, and now he's starting to have. And so, there's all these things that go into those decisions. And so, again, from a consumer standpoint, this is why we want to be more holistic in nature, right? Because it's not just one thing that should check the box to say yes, no, go, no go, right? It's all these things. So the more we understand that complete puzzle, then the easier it is to make those decisions.
Yeah, and from what I can tell, Embiid's been dealing with stuff for as long as he's been known to all of us. He's always had issues. We've got a number of questions that are more related to the sports fund and alumni ventures. I'm going to try and shoot through those quickly. If people need to leave, great. I want to thank everybody for participating, and I'm going to try and answer as many of these as I can. Josh, Keaton, KK, if I'm missing something, jump in. But when you think about venture returns, not everything is a good venture investment. What's the importance of sports as an initial market to unlock larger markets, wellness, healthcare, services, hospitality, et cetera? And how do we actually see that happening? Examples. We talked a lot about different things that started in elite sports and have trickled out into the world. And Aura started actually in the public world, but moved into the elite athlete world and is now coming back. A number of the various ways that people work out, that it manifests itself multiple times. And the nice thing about for venture returns, you can actually make some nice venture returns without it manifesting itself into the major markets as well. As alt capital markets have slowed, what is the business model shift necessary to attract funding? How is that uniquely manifesting in performance? The markets have slowed a little bit, and a lot of startups have really focused on becoming profitable earlier to minimize the amount of capital they're going to burn through as they grow their and actually make them somewhat stronger companies. But everything's cyclical, and I envision in about 5 years, capital will be cheap and people will be growing like crazy. And it's just, we're at a tight time right now, but most companies are managing that by cutting back on their burn and being more fundamentally efficient. And that goes across all markets. Can you provide an update on Fan Controlled Football, which is a company we invested in? They're expanding into, they already expanded into racing, and they've got a big event in a couple of weeks for their golf program. Seem to be doing okay. Are there startups in the ecosystem focused on the intersection of community and sports? What are some of the business models that are less reliant on hardware? Example, Peloton, Tonal. How do we assess investments for staying power in the space given the number of fads/trends in sports and fitness, like Peloton during the pandemic? As I mentioned, we're looking at investing in kind of 5 different pillars: fan engagement, media, esports, gaming, emerging leagues and teams, sports performance. Sports performance, the Peloton was a fad, and some people made a lot of money, based on the timing of their investment. But those do have impacts on us, and we look to see if we can get the types of returns we're looking for in the time frame, and there's an exit path to that. But because of investing in a variety of areas, we're going to be a little less susceptible to fads. If we invest in sports media or fan engagement, we don't see those as particularly fads. Esports. Back in the day, I told my kids to go out and play and not hang out playing video games, and one of their classmates actually is Ninja. So maybe they should have been playing esports. Clearly not a fad, although it felt like one for a while. It's a nice growing business worth billions. So there are a lot of things around it, and we're not just chasing after things that I won't guarantee we won't invest in something that turns out to be a fad, but we're certainly focused on investing in things that have a little more staying power. Will the fund invest in media rights, franchise, athlete sponsorship rights, athlete social account co-ownership? Just covered kind of the pillars. Our philosophy is we only invest in companies that are backed by venture capital fund. We only get into rounds that have a venture capital fund leading the round. We're going to look to VC funds and specific partners that understand that particular industry, as we've done with all of Alumni Ventures, and we don't see that changing in any way. Yeah, we're investing across that, but if our first step is there needs to be a venture capital fund leading the round. Can you talk about the type of companies the fund would be investing in? In this fund for investing in startups, is the TAM big enough for investors with a reasonable time horizon for payback? Just looking at the pillars, I did a quick Google search. Global health and fitness is a $125 billion market. Esports is over $1 billion. Fan engagement is $5 billion, expected to grow to $27 billion by the end of the decade. Sports media is $56 billion. Leagues and franchises, trillions. Although clearly we're not buying the New York Giants, but something as recent as pickleball has become a $65 billion business. There are leagues and franchises in alternative sports. We just saw in the US the launch of a professional women's volleyball league. There are opportunities for us to invest there, but we're also going to be investing in tried and true businesses that are helping with sports performance, and certainly, following that model of investing in rounds led by venture capital funds. The nature of the business, if you take venture capital money, you're going to have an exit in 5 to 8 years is your plan, 10 on the outside. And we're not going into companies that are planning on being lifestyle businesses. It's part of the contract. It's the implied contract when you take venture capital money, and you're going to exit and provide returns for the investors. So plenty of business opportunities out there for us to build a portfolio around, and we're really excited by it. Panel, did I miss anything? I think I got through all the questions, and get to let people back to their Wednesdays.
That was the sprint at the end. Go check your Whoop for results. Thank you guys, man. It was a lot of fun, and I hope people enjoy hearing from two really highly regarded, well-established people in the industry.